Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Rain, rain, go away, come again another day.
It's been raining a lot. This is true.
It has been.
It's just bringing down the mood.
Our producer, Austin, he's moving into a house this weekend, and he's very sad.
He wants the rain to go away.
Because they can't finish all the work.
Oh, yeah? That's
Don't want to track mud into a new house
just something
either.
to bring up.
That would be the worst. That would be the worst. Brand new house.
And you don't want to be the one that does it. Are you helping move?
No, I didn't get asked. You know,
Okay.
I think they've got movers.
Okay.
You know.
All right.
You guys think I'm upscale with the pool.
Yeah. Because it's Memorial Day weekend coming up.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like when everybody opens their pools.
Time and a half movers.
I feel bad that Austin can't defend himself. We're just
That's,
talking about.
I think, partly why we say it. Also, it's good
trapped
to be
over there.
back with you guys.
Welcome
I just
back,
want to say
Jess.
I've missed you.
The rumors aren't true. Jess is still with
I'm
us
back.
at the moment.
I'm here.
Everyone said you left. We had one of our listeners write in a question. I thought we could start the show off discussing this.
Okay.
They asked, what 1990s or 2000s Christian music album do you wish could make a comeback? And I don't know if we really have rules or guidelines on how to answer this, but I'm wondering, does that mean the band makes a comeback with a new album, or just it gets popular to listen to that album again?
That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's not the band makes a comeback.
I'm going to give my answer.
Okay, go ahead.
It is 100%. No doubt. Not no doubt.
I was going to say, no doubt. That's not a Christian.
Doubt.
I mean, some
100% no doubt my answer is Jesus Freak.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's
Jesus-
actually mine,
yeah,
too.
Jesus Freak.
Yes. DC
I mean,
Talk.
I remember my Walkman Jesus Freak. That whole album
Did you have
was
the
just
cassette,
so good.
or did you have the
I
CD
definitely have
Walkman?
the CD, and I just picture even the album cover, that little eye on there, and it's
Yep.
like that brownish
Yep.
gold. And
I can still sing all the songs on that album. Jesus Freak, let me have that rap.
yeah,
Let's do it
I
right
remember being, I don't know how old I was at the time, but I remember that was one of the first times I remember hearing a Christian artist that I really liked was kind of mainstream. So I remember hearing that at Skateland, and skating to Skateland, and all of a sudden that was me. I'm a Jesus freak. It wiggled around like marmalade jelly. It took me a while to catch what he's. Anyway, I was so proud. I was
Yes.
proud to be a Christian.
Jesus freak.
Yeah,
That's a good album.
and I didn't care if people labeled me that way.
Yeah.
Okay, and mine would be the same answer. And I remember
That's why I said it first. I had a feeling.
I did too.
So you can't.
But I'm gonna say that to piggyback off that is I remember Youth Fest that used to come back in the 90s, 2000s. They came through with Youth Fest. DC Talk did. And so I just remember that was a very memorable concert too.
My first concert ever was DC Talk.
Really?
In Rapid City, South Dakota.
Okay, have you let your
Love is
kids
a
listen to it?
verb.
Because my kids like Jesus Freak. They like the album.
I don't know if I've
to
played
them,
it.
But it's not like they've asked me then, Mom, play that song again.
Now, what's amazing about this is, and Eric hasn't given his answer. I'm excited for that, but that few of these guys are still frontliners, headliners. Toby Mac
Yeah.
is, and then what is the
Tate went on to be with
Newsboys.
Newsboys.
So it just
Kevin Max has got his Sad Astronauts band or something like that. He was always the outcast,
Yeah.
but he's still doing stuff. But
just amazing. So
which is interesting because Kevin Max is, I think it's called Sad Astronauts or something like that, is the name of his band. And the drummer that recorded, at least in the band, I don't know if he's a touring drummer, is Peter Fuller, who was the lead singer of the Newsboys. So
that's fun.
wild. I would love to hear your answers. Everyone else that's given that,
same.
especially Carly. I think Carly's the one that submitted that. So
Did we all have the same answer?
I no.
Okay.
But it's close because I do really like that
Yeah.
album. But I also my first DC Talk experience was New Thing.
oh yeah, he is doing
And I got
everything.
that CD at a pawn shop, and I for whatever reason listened to it a lot. then Free at Last was so good after that, and then it was Jesus Freak.
And then Supernatural.
And Supernatural was that was just
Hello, goodbye.
all those DC Talk albums
Yes.
were great. But then the other one for me is like Audio Adrenaline.
Audio A, and we're in.
Don't
your
censor,
I
don't
strongly
censor
feel
me
like-
and Bloom.
Yeah.
All those albums were so good.
Yeah. I remember meeting Audio Adrenaline, and they signed, when they would sign drum head covers. So I've got a drum head cover from Audio A. That's what I call them.
Keep that forever.
Really liked Big Tent Revival. I don't know if anybody, that's a little more of an underdog maybe.
No,
but
I feel like
do
this.
you like
we are naming all the names that could be a really awesome summer tour.
Yeah.
If they
If they all made a comeback.
So DC Talk, we know you're listening.
the
Get these guys
opening
together.
act when I saw DC Talk was Out of Eden. Do you remember them? Yeah. That was the
Yes.
opening act for DC Talk. I never heard of them at the time, but listened
bringing
to a
it
lot
back.
of it. Yeah.
That was fun. That's kind of fun.
Let me tell you the sleeper album though, for people to listen to. This will tell you about my childhood, so you can Google it. Unity Clan. Okay, that's the name of a rap group. Unity and Clan with a K, and they had a song called "What You Gonna Do." And I don't know, they like stole the track to the Oompa Loompa track. So it was
no.
Oh, like they sampled it, you mean?
Buddy,
Like,
what you gonna do when Jesus comes?
Oh my gosh.
No,
And
just
so
stop.
like I would just bump that in my Kia on my way to Burke High School and be like, "What up? I'm a Jesus freak." So
You just let everyone. The other one is what was the name? I was trying to look it up, but I couldn't think of it.
Zoe Girl.
No,
I thought you were a big Zoe Girl fan.
no,
Rachel Lampa?
not. I mean, yeah, there's some Amy
Avalon.
Grant, Michael W. Smith,
Twyla Paris.
all of those. There was like the more indie rock, punk rock, like Goaty Hook, and the Banana Man album. That was
No.
really good.
I was more into the
Five
Christian
Iron
rap.
Frenzy.
Did you ever have?
yeah.
Did you ever listen to the Gospel Gangsters?
No.
That was like one of my
Remember the
first like Christian rap albums.
Supertones were
Yeah.
like big back then.
Yep.
I just there's so many. Kirk Franklin,
T-Bone.
that album. What was it? New Nation or something?
Stomp.
Oh, was that song on there?
I think the Stomp was
Oh,
on there.
he's
On the
got
New
some good
Nation
ones.
project.
We wanna stomp.
Yeah. Anyways, there's too many, but yeah.
We'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, let us know in the comments or wherever you're listening. Send us an email. We're not going to have headlines today before we get to our guest, but we did want to just acknowledge, because we're recording this on Wednesday, so this was the day following the shooting in Texas, and it's one of those things where we've talked about it before, like the emotional capacity that we can have as humans to deal with these tragedies that are just we're being inundated with constantly. And then when something like this happens where it is involving 19 children, it's just gut-wrenching on so many levels, and there's just so many questions that I have, I'm sure other people have. And we're not here to debate anything really. I just think we wanted to take a minute to acknowledge it and to say that I think that we're grieving, we're praying. I don't know if you had
I think
anything to
one of
add.
the things too that I've been thinking about is we've talked a lot about on the podcast about striving to have empathy. We have a lot of different guests on that we want to understand their feelings and their stories and where they came from. And I think when we have a larger capacity for empathy, things like this, we can really put ourselves in someone's shoes and relate to how they might be feeling. Or, I mean, I'm sure all of us are like, we're looking at our own kids and saying, well, we got to bring our kids home. And I think that it's important when we're dealing with that. It's like, we need to talk about it. We need to find a way to also process it, because it's so heavy. It's so heavy when things like this happen and we can relate so easily.
Yeah.
I think that's what the type of people we want to be. We want to be in people's stories and care and feel, but it's also like equally as important, like to process with somebody, or like to check in on your friends, or like Alex had a couple posts this week, and he just kept coming to mind with me, and I was like, I just at least want to acknowledge like people's feelings. And I think that these are times where we're far removed from things, but it also hits close to home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my kids aren't out of school yet. They've got 2 days left. And so like today was the first time I've ever thought like I'm driving them to school, and I'm like, I've been obviously in their classrooms and I've done some dad stuff there. And like it's the first time thought ever crossed my mind, like, okay, where are their classrooms in the building? And like, how close are they to doors and all that? And like there's security and like all those things. But yeah, it's like a thought I've never even considered. Like, okay, I mean, especially since this was like one classroom that someone was able to get into, and just like, oh man, like would my kids be that classroom? How close are they? Like what were their chances of, so that, I mean, there's just tough, difficult thoughts to process. And I mean, for me, it's just been a heavy week. Like I did a funeral on Monday of someone who took their own life, and then this. And so just a lot of those feelings of questions and why, and just a heavy week. And so that on top of it was just kind of like, another kind of gut blow that I'm still processing through, and I know so many other people are, and also like, reminded that we have a Savior that weeps. One of those passages in Scripture that's super short is John 11:35, and it's this picture of a Savior who weeps with two sisters who had just lost their brother, and Jesus knew like that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, but like he took time to pause and grieve with them. I don't think he was necessarily weeping over the fact that Lazarus was dead, because he knew he was going to raise him, but I think he was just overwhelmed by sitting in the wake of people grieving. And and I think that's reality, and I think that's what we're called to. Romans tells us we're called to weep with those who weep. And so, man, my hope is that, I don't know, we would do that, I guess, instead of just jumping out to all the rhetoric that can be about this. And there's real problems that do need to be solved and addressed, and solutions that can be found. But man, if that's the first place that we go, I don't know. I would just challenge you to invite the Spirit into that. If that's the first place you're going this week, is to those things, and you don't even take the time to weep. Jesus wept before finding the solution, even though he knew it was coming. And so I think that's just part of what it means to be looking like Christ, and to model Christ, and to know that his Spirit's alive in our lives. Are we weeping with those fellow image bearers who weep? So.
Yeah, it's tragic, and it's one of those things that, again, we have to resist the temptation to take something like this and just over politicize it and use it as fuel for a fire that is going to burn either way. But yeah, you can't avoid it. You go to Twitter or Facebook or anything, and you just instantly all of these hot takes out there, and it's tough to navigate because there are so much emotion there, and I don't know. You don't know what to say, but yet you feel you rightfully feel this righteous anger about it, and it's just something that I think we can't be afraid to talk about, but also we have to approach it with the humility to admit we don't have all the answers to this. But I just can't imagine, like, you seen interviews with kids that were in the school, and I think about my own experience going to school, and it's just like, that was never a thought that crossed my mind. Like, you kind of innately felt safe at school as a kid. The idea that our kids have to go through safety drills for this sort of thing, that this is just something that's in the forefront of their mind. Like, the most that we had was a tornado or fire drill, and they have to be this prepared for something, a gunman to come in and to barricade himself into your classroom and kill every one of the people in there and the teachers. That's what happened. And we can't. And the thing that I'm most upset with myself about is my ability to compartmentalize this stuff. I'm so upset with myself that I can hear it, and I'm more concerned with the political feelings of other people that I compartmentalize it and I don't allow myself to put my actual feelings in it and to go, what in the world are we doing that we can't protect our little children? And we're not willing to do anything because of whatever thing we believe, and it's just, it's infuriating.
Yeah, I know we talked once on here with Kyler, who was a high schooler at the time, but he shared his story and PTSD and all that comes along with that of a school shooting at Millard South and how he watched his principal get shot and other people at his school and just the fear and everything that goes along with that. And so, I was even thinking back to, that episode and that interview too, and like just the long-term ramifications of his life and what these kids are going to have to live through and just all the fear, just the wake that something like this causes beyond death, which is the worst of all, but like the lives that, the trauma, we talked about that in the sexual way last week, but the trauma and the wake of that, we have to pray against that too, because there's an enemy that wants to jump in and capitalize on these things too. And sometimes it is through, it's through making us callous. It is making maybe us go towards the political area of it, just ignore it. There's so many different ways that I think he wants to block.
It's happened so much lately in different contexts. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm so callous, like you said, to it, that you just like, oh, another shooting. But then it takes something like this that's so horrendous to kind of shake you out of that a little bit and go, what are we doing about this? Are we doing something? I don't know. We're not, we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge it. Everyone be in prayer for that. Just pray for our country, pray for the hearts of our leaders. And this isn't just about gun control or taking rights away and all that stuff. I think as a whole, there are so many layers to why these things happen. And every time we hear a story, online they were talking about doing this. The person was already planning this. Why aren't we stepping in before these things happen? Or there's just so many layers to these conversations. I think we need to pray for our leaders. Pray that God will raise up leaders and to take on this stuff and that that we can talk about it in a way that is productive and not destructive.
Yep.
All right. Up next, Alex, you got a chance to sit down with the VP of Development from the Christian and Missionary Alliance, Tim Meier, and have a conversation primarily about the future of missions, but also a little bit of what the church is going to look like in the future. And it's a really, really great conversation. So stay tuned for that.
Hey, well, today we are joined, like we said earlier, by Tim Meier. And Tim, I'm going to let you explain your title, your role in our denomination, and then we'll go a little bit from there.
Great. Hey, Alex, super honored to be with you. Really fun to hang with Christ community this weekend. So this church is really important to our family of churches. Yeah. So I know that you probably know that, but it's really an honor to hang with you. So my current role, it's been the role for about 3.5 years, is a vice president for development. So our team oversees basically anything that the Alliance family sees. So from Facebook to the website to Alliance Life magazine to any video that we ever produce, so all the content creation, like things like our year-end offering and then 40 days of prayer and all these things that some people are aware of and some aren't.
Yeah.
So all of that. And then helping churches and individuals just engage in God's global mission. So every year in Alliance churches, people give about $67 to $72 million to further the work of missions around the world. And so our team is responsible for a lot of that as well. So I give oversight to that team.
Cool. And how about you as family, father, all those kind of things?
Yeah, we got 2 boys. Blaine is 15, Jude is 11. We just recently moved to Columbus about 11 months ago. Rachel and I are celebrating 20 years of marriage this summer. So been a crazy ride through a lot of different things, but that's our fun family right
That's
now.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know for like a lot of our listeners and even probably people at Christ Community Church, we don't always know that we're a part of this family that we're a part of, because it's not like maybe some mainline denominations that it's kind of the flagship or it's literally on our logo or whatever that means. And so I'm a guy who's like a born an AG kid. My dad was a youth pastor and then found CCC like post college. Worked. I'm a mutt. So, but I've fallen in love with just its denomination. And what I love to ask, people that work for, like, how did you come across the Alliance? Are you a thoroughbred, or like what made you fall in love with it if you're not?
Yeah. So the better question for me is, why am I sticking around? I am one of those thoroughbreds. So my grandparents actually helped plant, my great-grandparents helped plant one of our first Alliance churches in Toledo, Ohio. And then my grandfather was an Alliance pastor. I come from a ministry family myself. So my growing up was very CMA, but then I went to a Wesleyan college and I started hanging out with other folks and definitely connected, through different leadership programs and stuff, and thought, okay, there's a big world out there. That was, in my late teens, early 20s. But there's some uniqueness about the Alliance that really keeps me hanging around. My wife was not raised in the Alliance. I love our passion for least reach people. So that part is, and one of the things I'm going to say in the sermon tomorrow is like, look, we're not in like a denomination competition. It's not like Jesus is like Nazarenes first, now Baptist, now, but every family of churches, just like every church, has to ask, why are we here? Like, what is the unique stewardship of our calling? And one of the things that the Alliance has been about from the very beginning is, man, there are people all over the world that don't have access to the gospel. We got to get that access. The best way to provide it is to send people who show up and live in those neighborhoods. So I love that heartbeat. And I just love the diversity of the Alliance, both from an ethnic diversity and like, we're all a bunch of mutts and even the thoroughbreds, like we're all over the map, on a lot of like little issues. And I love that. I think it positions us well for the future, actually, that we're not so in a box that we can't think outside of what's next.
Yeah. Those are things I love about it as well. So was this like VP job in the Alliance, was that one of your hopes in ministry, or how, what, just a quick, how did you end up there, and how did God call you into that?
Yeah, this is wild that I'm doing what I'm doing. I just read this book by David Epstein called Range. That's really about, like, the subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a World of Specialization. Okay. And even here in some of your journey, like, I did this, then I did this, like, that's basically what he's studying. And that's my life. Like, I don't know how I in this role in some ways. I started as a youth pastor, student ministry, I was a worship pastor for a while. And then God called my wife and I to consider overseas ministry. Okay. We always thought being a missionary meant like living in Africa, and I'm just not that guy. Like I love Africa. I've been to like rough places, and I'm pretty weak as a human. So God called us and we went to France, which is a little easier to live, but a hard place to do ministry. And then, so we did church planting stuff there, young adults, all kinds of different things. Loved it, fully intended to go back. And we were just on like home visit assignment kind of thing. And there was a new ministry in the Alliance called Envision that was just starting to get off the ground. And so they came to me in 2012 and asked me to consider that. And then I did that for 5 years, starting in 2013. And so our president came to me in the summer of 2018 and just said, look, we're having a transition after a bunch of years. You love communication, you love missions, you love engaging people and leading a team. I think it's time for a bigger challenge. And so that's how I ended up here. But it was not like an aspiration. In fact, I don't know, like denominational structure. Like I knew the minute I took this job, all my friends would be like sold out. Yeah. Like now I lost the edge. I'm just sitting in a boardroom all the time, stuff like that. So it hasn't been like that, but it's still, I get it. It's
and we'll get more into how it hasn't been like that in a little bit. Yeah. But just for our listeners that are like, what Envision, if you probably heard that before, we send our 8th graders every year to Chicago. Awesome. I know our college students are going to Atlanta this year, and our friend the Protos are at an Envision site in Miami. And so it's kind of one of those grassroots mission kind of, especially first sending places that a lot of our students go and our college students. And so, that's fun. And I've had a lot of experiences through Envision as well. So you're talking about that idea of not being in a boardroom and maybe some of the thoughts of what denominational leadership looks like. And over the last couple of years, you guys have been on a journey leading us as a denomination through just, who we are, that unique DNA that you talked about earlier, and a journey of, hey, we're kind of in the Christian Mecca of Colorado Springs, where a lot of denominations kind of headquarter, but didn't really represent the fullness of the diversity of our denomination or even the reachability of a lot of our churches, know. But at one point, people were like, Colorado Springs is the best place. We're going to give you all this tax incentive and all that kind of stuff to land you there. But tell us a little bit about like the journey of, we've moved. I know John talked about it a little bit, but we moved from Colorado Springs. Now we're in Ohio, which is you're probably excited about a little bit, as far as family wise. But tell us about like what that journey's like and how's it invigorated you to say, this looks different when your friends are like, oh, you're just kind of sold out to denomination. You sit in a boardroom. Like, how do you explain how that's not the reality?
Yeah, no, it's so good. So, I mean, there are boardroom times, right? So there's stuff like that. But first of all, I'm one of the only people in this whole national office staff that was actually raised in Ohio. So I grew up in Northeast Ohio. My wife's from Cleveland. I'm from Akron. So this was
you
for
and LeBron,
us.
huh?
Yeah, just a kid from Akron.
Yeah,
so
cool.
we, this was a weird thing for us because we left Ohio in '99 and, to go to college. And then we didn't ever think we were going to go back. I still have roots there and I still suffer with the sports teams and everything, but I'm not like, I wasn't, thinking, okay, Ohio is going to be the place. When John came to us as leaders a number of years ago now and was like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. I think God is stirring this in me. And he talked about that a little bit with you guys. I had this gut that like we were going to get close to Ohio just because we were like, all right, where's the proximity of churches? Where are diverse growing places? How do we do something gritty? So like the Alliance is like this gritty kind of blue collar, like edgy group. Yeah. So we aren't really like, White Tower, like theologians or like, we're just like missionary kind of people. And so Ohio is not like this sexy thing. Like when people are like, oh, you're moving to Ohio, it's not like, oh, well, that's amazing. Right. And so, but the journey has been very challenging on the one side and really awesome on the other side. So a couple quick snapshots. First of all, my kid's school district currently, so we're about 10-minute drive from the new national office, has 47 unique languages and 52 home countries. So some of those countries share languages. And so just the diversity, like I was talking with my son Jude, who's moving up to 6th grade, and looking at all the kids who are in like his new class, and he's the only Anglo kid in this one section, which is such a unique difference and change. Yeah. Awesome school. Like the whole thing is great. But from Colorado Springs, where there maybe be one non-majority kid. Now, it's not like diversity is better or worse. Like we're doing it bad because we have too many white people, whatever. And I know you asked John about the white leader thing. But that's who the Alliance is. Like it just represents who we are. And so to be in a place that represents the heartbeat of the nations, as well as just who we are in this country, it's been huge. The other thing is, I have 40 people on my staff. 20 of them decided they couldn't make the move, which is super painful. Yeah. So we had to keep everything going while moving there, doing all this stuff, reshaping culture, asking the big questions. But every one of those new people brings a new vision, a new like wiring, a new diversity to our team, whether it's ethnic or not. And so that's been a joy, even though it's been painful too. And then just seeing, so if I go back to, we did like 90 locations when we were searching. We visited 90 unique places.
Was Omaha one?
Omaha was not one. So we narrowed the cities to 4 and then to 3 that fit into this like honestly,
we have a terrible airport. I know that. But.
So if Omaha would have been a little bit further east to get closer to other churches, I think it definitely would have been on the radar for a lot of
That makes me feel better.
Seriously.
Thank you.
So it's a proximity thing. But when we visited all these places, like we visited old, like you've got this Ameritrade building just sitting empty, like buildings like that had been empty during COVID, all kinds of old churches, whatever. And this was one of the 2 places where the city actually met us. And I felt So part of my job with Envision was like, and we, helped discern with the protos, like, hey, this is the place from Miami, from the DR to Miami and all that. Like a lot of my job was going into the city, meeting with people, being like, this is where God's leading us. I think this can happen here, like all over the world. Super fun. This one really felt like, okay, God has opened the door. Like these are people of peace who are saying, we're not believers, but we want to have the same impact on this community that you do. We've done research. Let's do this together. And we're living that out right now, which has been really fun.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So as you look at just the global work of the Alliance, and even I think the term missionary, that's a word that has long-standing roots in the Christian church, and our denomination uses a different word now, or two words, right? International workers. But as you just survey in your lifetime and over the last few years what missionary work looks like, how would you say it's the same as it's always been, but how would you say it's changed drastically over the last decade or so?
That's a great question. So what will always be the same about missionary work is about gospel presence. So I talked about presence before, but that's really, us showing up in people's lives, in their communities, communicating verbally the gospel, but also holistically ministering in gospel love to people's needs. So that will always be the same. One of the things that's really changing, first of all, the world is globalizing at an unbelievable rate.
Yeah.
So people are all moving from different countries to other countries. Diversity is happening everywhere rapidly. So you see something like Ukraine, so all these people are on the move, but that's happening, like people are on the move. If you just look at maps of where people were born and how many people live in countries they weren't born in today, it's exponential. That changes the landscape of missions, because in the past, a lot of times you'd go, all right, we're going to set up in West Africa. We've got one people group, one tribe, one nation, whatever, and we're going to laser focus on that. And that still happens in certain places. But man, in every place, there's like a pluralistic. So you've got people who come from different faith backgrounds, secular faith backgrounds, ethnic faith backgrounds. And so I would say it's getting more urban. Like missionary focus is more urban, because that's where the people go for jobs. So everybody's moving to cities, and in the next 10 years, it's like 50% of the world's population will live in major cities. So that's a huge deal. I would say because of the restriction of like missionary types around the world, more and more folks are going to provide some sort of meaningful impact in their society as a doctor, teacher, whatever, to create that kind of presence, and then they can come along with the gospel. Like in the past, 100 years ago, we were just sending missionaries as pastors to these places, and it's very rare to send a missionary as a pastor. Like you almost have to have another skill now. And it's not always true, but like I would say that a lot of our folks are, even if they weren't thinking, I'm going to be an executive director of a nonprofit, like that's what they're going to have to do in order to even have standing. So there are geopolitical realities, there are urbanization realities, and then there's just restriction realities. So, our global professional workforce is growing a lot in the Alliance. So our marketplace ministries arm, our comma arm, like our church planters are always going to be there, and they're a huge emphasis and structure, but thinking outside the box and how do we do this creatively is all the time the conversation. So if you think about where are we going for the very least reach folks, a lot of times those least reach folks are now showing up to cities where we have access to. Which is a totally new ball game. Like, oh, I could meet somebody from Mongolia, but they're in this place rather than having to go to Mongolia. So there's a lot we could say here.
And I think one of the Alliance distinctives is we talk about, and sometimes we use the language of creative access countries or things like that, but one of the distinctives is that we are trying to go to like the places, the 1040 window, whatever you might call it, where there's just, the odds are stacked against us, where it's not maybe the easiest places to go. There haven't been people that have plowed the way for a long time. It's places where lives are literally at risk. People have to take other jobs or careers in order to, and kind of be under the radar to do. I know several mission or international workers that are part of CCC that we can't even talk about, like where they're at, what their names are, because of all those things. And so how is the Alliance unique in that that creative access, passion for, not just reaching the lost, because we could go a lot of places to do that, but specifically in some of these places.
So this is our focus as an alliance. So it's not everybody's focus, and I get that, but in the alliance, like, this is what we do. So I think this harkens back to some of our early DNA too. When Simpson, our founder, was finding the first wave of missionaries, there's all these stories about these teenagers and people in their 20s who left, went to Africa, India, China with caskets in the boats. So there's like these iconic stories, knowing they wouldn't come back. I think that, and they knew it was going to take forever. So sometimes those people, like, we have these big stories of, we have more than 1 million believers in Congo in Alliance churches. It took 50 years for that to happen. They would see one tribe, then another tribe, and people would die and get murdered and get diseases. So I think we're at a new era of slow stories. So I'm like, my team has stories as responsible.
Yeah.
It is a challenge because the most compelling stories we can't tell half the time because they're in these places. But also, a lot of the people that we're sending to these places, it's going to take maybe 15 years to get a good story.
Yeah.
Because it's just like the slow, hard grind of sharing the gospel, living with people, and in a very restrictive place where their lives are on the line. Like, it's not an exaggeration that they would be threatened. I mean, we have to be uber careful all the time with people's faces, with names. If a video goes out and it accidentally slips up, people are scouring the internet for that stuff right now. And so, but that's our focus. That's who we're going to be.
I love it. And that's what I love about the Alliance, and how CCC, is a part of this family. That's all about doing that, not just the Great Commission Fund, which is awesome, but there's people that are maybe even listening to this right now that God's called to go to one of these places, and people that are, getting engineering degrees or doctoral degrees that are going through all that, spending that money, spending that time so that they can go to one of these places and make a difference. It's just, to me, like you said, that's never been my call, and I'm probably not, tough enough to tough some of that stuff out and all those things. But what those people do it's insane, the sacrifice that are made, and so grateful for that. What are you most excited about as you think of the future of the Alliance? That we've moved, we're more positioned closer to a lot of the churches, specifically our denomination, but even the church in general.
Yeah.
What's most exciting to you about, being on the forefront and leading a denomination?
Yeah. It feels like this is a refining moment for the church in America, for sure. So other countries have been through these things, or they're going through, but right now we have to wake up and realize, like, okay, everything's changing around us. What does it look like to contextualize the gospel? In other words, understand what the context we live in and how to make that clear to people. But then also, how do we do that with different kind of folks like you just described? Like, an engineer would become an international worker. Yeah, that's what's going to happen in this country as well. So I think as we think about the U.S. Alliance, both in terms of our international workforce, but also the expressions that God is birthing, they're just way outside the box. So I just heard the story last week of multiple churches being planted in a prison because this guy got saved, he got discipled, and now he's like multiplying because he got this missional bug. There's stuff that just doesn't fit inside like the traditional, okay, we're going to hire the pastor, get the building, do this thing. Those are still really good in a lot of places, for real. I'm not just saying that, but the future is gritty and outside the box and strange and missionary and all the rest in ways that, Christendom is totally dead in this country. Like, people are not waking up like, I can't wait to go to church.
Yeah.
It's just not happening. So the thing that excites me is that refining moment invites true disciples to join Jesus in true discipleship, but also to get on mission with them. Because I think when it's easy around us, or when everything's comfortable and everything's rocking, like, you don't have to maintain your edge. You don't have to maintain surrender to Christ. So that sounds, everybody's really scared right now. Like, oh, we're losing. And I'm like, it doesn't feel like the places where the church has rapidly grown around the world in the last 50 years have been places where people are literally getting put in jail. And we're not close to that. Like, so And what is the Alliance's place in that? So our vision of all of Jesus for all the world, like that deep, hey, we've got to experience the fullness of Christ, and we have to do that to every segment of society. I just feel like we have these like young Hmong leaders and older Vietnamese leaders and all over the map who are ready to mobilize together in many ways as we sort of eliminate some of the barriers that have been blocking people in the past and just say, all right, we're all on the same team here. Like, let's get this going and get this done. So,
yeah. And I think one of the exciting but scary things is like our ecclesiology is going to get messed up. You know, we have to go back to scripture and be like, what of this that we're doing has been cultural and
right.
How much of that is not bad, and how much of it has God used that in a place and time for incredible benefit? Like, there's no denying that. But how much are we like holding on to what the mission that Jesus gave us to go and make disciples, or how much are we saying, hey, show up and join us? And I think that there's going to be, in a lot of denominations, willingness to, in arguments and churches, there's going to be a lot of tough boardroom conversations in a lot of places as we consider what is the gift that God has given us to steward. And that's one of the things I love about even the bold move of the Alliance saying, hey, we're not going to just be sitting in a building anymore in Colorado Springs. We're going to create it's crazy. I mean, it
is crazy.
It doesn't make sense. Like, it's not super logical for a lot of people, and a lot of denominational leaders might be like, okay, well, we'll see how this works. Yep. That stuff doesn't work. But I think the willingness to risk and to say, this isn't going to work unless the Spirit is a part of it. Right. And that's what the church should be. Like, we've been functioning, I think, as a whole, not picking on anyone, but
no, for sure,
long enough being able to get it done on our own. And I think it's going to force us to lean into the power of the Spirit.
So COVID disrupted us from the outside, everybody, right? So the last time I was supposed to be at CCC, that week, like COVID was started to happen and I was supposed to preach. And then I talked to Mark and Craig and all these guys and we were like, I probably shouldn't come. And literally the world shut down the next day. And first online service and all that was that weekend. That's an external disruption. Mm-hmm. But when we know that other external disruptions are coming, you can either just go, let's just hold on. We'll keep doing it. This is God's thing, which is sometimes an excuse to say, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah. Let him figure out the wake of it. Or you say, we're going to internally disrupt. So if you internally disrupt and start change processes before you either get ahead of it and get on mission with what God's doing, and you might mess up. But part of our philosophy is like, we're going to fail fast, like, take risks, do it. Some of it will work, some of it won't work, but that's what it means to like just move in faith. And I have been having some interesting conversations with some other denominational leaders who are watching, and it's fascinating. Like, I don't know if I would have had the guts to do what John did and really do this, but there's other people thinking about like reimagining their office buildings or maybe even relocating and stuff. So I do think some of it is spurring other conversations, which is cool. It's encouraging.
Yeah, that's so fun. So as we think of this crazy mission that we've been given, and we look at, I totally forgot the question I was going to ask. So everyone knows this is real. This is live. And I forgot. So as we consider just the call that we've been given, this idea of disrupting ourselves instead of external disruptions and things like that. As you look at the next generation, younger people, you're a dad of a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old, and we're living in this land where we have digital immigrants and digital natives, and this whole digital landscape is changing everything. How do you think that plays a part in the next wave of the church, next wave of missions? Like, we're able to connect to literally people listen to this from other places across the globe. Yeah. How do you think we use the digital space to continue to be on mission? How do you see it happen in your kids' lives, discipleship, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, there's no putting the cat back in the bag. Like, we're now in a digital space. And if anything, it's accelerated over the last couple of years. So we have got to be in this space intentionally and doing wide wise stewardship of this moment as well. So with every form of communication and type of community, Christ is always inviting us deeper to ask good questions. So what I don't want to see us do is get lazy in this space either and just be like, oh, cool. Like we know a certain technique or we know a mode that worked. And so that'll keep working. So I think we're going to have to continually reinvent what we're doing. The fact that some people are trying to figure out how do we minister in the VR metaverse space, I think is good. Yeah. Like it's scary and weird, but my kid was on the Oculus last night playing some boxing game and that's what he wants to do. Mm-hmm. If that's what he wants to do, then you can say you're dumb or you meet people where they're at. So I think we've got to enter the space well. We're seeing and hearing stories, especially from ethnic churches, where they're reaching people all over the world in amazing ways. So I met with a Congolese pastor this week who there's an Eritrean church, which is Ethiopian Eritrean. So Eritrea is this, it's a whole story. But he planted this church, I think 3-4 years ago with 30 people in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. It's now 350 people. But their global reach online is like crazy because a couple of their younger people got in early with the digital space and they're reaching people who do not have this kind of message in their language. So I've seen this. It's funny because a lot of the either resistance or excitement is with people that are familiar to us. We're similar probably kind of people. Yeah. But what I've seen a lot of energy and excitement is for ethnic churches to reach people back in other countries or who are living in our country in other ways. So we've got to be really wise. I love groups like Access that are helping, parents with kids and all these in the digital space to be wise, all Andy Crouch's stuff like TechWise Family and all those kind of things. Like can't just unlimited let my kids run free, but to say we're not going to do this is silly at this point. Yeah. And I know that CCC actually has a lot of people sticking with you guys online because the experience is better than most, frankly. So that's the other hard part is that, from a tech perspective, if it's terrible, it's going to be hard. But we got to keep thinking outside the box and mobilizing resources there for sure. I mean, we're going to try to get the Alliance on TikTok. It's funny because there's all this funny stuff about, which is the right vehicle, what's not. Caitlin Giberson, she's 29. She leads our whole digital team for all the Alliance. And she's like, Tim, every week, she's like, why are we not on TikTok again? Yeah. And it's just a matter of like, okay, let's just do it. And so, and you guys are so creative with all that stuff.
We luckily have good volunteers that help us.
You're super creative though. Most churches aren't open.
But we'll see. Maybe be watching out. We may use your sermon out of context. That's one of our TikTok things. And so we take like sermons and try to use them out of context.
Actually, our team shares a lot of those with each other. Okay. Because they want to do Stumbo. So if you guys could help us with a couple Stumbo out of context pieces, that would be awesome.
That's good. I think when he was here, we have one of with him on it. And so
if we could do all of counsel out of context, that would be just an idea.
Yeah. That might be messy though. I don't know. That was my first counsel and that was fun. So as you're just imagining and dreaming of how do you, in knowing that, like knowing some churches, because I don't know what the percentage is, and maybe you could tell me, of churches in the Alliance are smaller churches. Like we just hosted our district conference here, and like I just have to acknowledge that I'm on like a cruise ship. Like I'm sitting next to so many pastors, and it's them. And like I almost feel guilty saying what my job title is because I'm like just a person on a massive staff making this thing go. And so how do you continue to press forward and support churches that are like, hey, we want to be innovative and God's resourced us for this kind of stuff. But then churches that are like, hey, no, we're faithfully being on mission in smaller context to not make them feel like they're being pushed out or just, a body count.
This is tricky what you're asking because this is the kind of stuff we wrestle through all the time. Like, so some of the answer is providing resources for churches that can't create their own. So you guys don't need a denomination. Like you would be fine on your own. You could continue the same partnerships. You have the resources to create. You have innovative people. like you said, there are a ton of churches under 100 people, ton of churches under 200 people. I forget the actual stat, but it's something like 60 or 70% of our churches, right? So if that's true, then a lot of those people just don't have the margins. They're doing pastoral care. They're preparing sermons. So anything that we can just go, here's the tool, use it. So we have something coming out called Alliance 101 that will capture a lot of our core DNA pieces. That's like a module-based deal that people can just use for membership classes or whatever, but they'll have the videos and the brand stuff and everything in there. So some of it is, how can we help them be innovative without having to recreate the wheel, number one. Number two, some of it is about connecting people. So a lot of the fun parts of my job are, like, after this, I'll think about people that should meet you, right? And it's like, oh, they're struggling with something. I bet a 10-minute conversation would help them so much. So I was just a couple of weekends ago at a youth retreat, actually, and a couple of guys said, hey, you did this Alliance Worship initiative where we got songwriters together and we released new Alliance Worship songs. They were like, could you please help us find somebody that could teach us how to lead worship? So it's exactly what you described. Like, they're the guy who has to lead the worship. And so connecting them to a network of people who already exist and just do this grassroots, that's part of the way to not shame people, resource them. The other answer is, I always push those churches to say, there are people in your church right now who could do amazing stuff and you're not releasing them. Take a risk. So there are business people who would love to just consult with you about the organization of this church. There are young people who are already way better than anybody over 50 or whatever that could do some of this tech or digital. Just like train them for a second about what you're trying to do and just release them. So I think that's part of the secret too, is innovation comes from a variety of spaces when you are open-handed and you're not tightly controlling every single thing and you just let it happen, grassroots. So.
Yeah, I know. I don't know you a ton, but as the leadership you have in the denomination, and I've gone to different circles, and people like Tim Meier, like, you're kind of known as like the maverick, getting older now, but the young guy that's like in the national office and trying to press forward and trying to get us to think differently. And so if I'm a young leader and I'm like, okay, I'm a part of a denominate or whatever organization that is stuck. It feels like it's stuck, and I know that it needs to continue to move forward, and I'm all in for this organization, and I feel like I'm stuck because God's called me to this organization, and it'd be easier to leave and just go create my own thing, but I love this thing so much. Like, what encouragement or tips would you give somebody on how to be younger, how to continue to lead forward in any kind of organization?
That's a good question. So I love this book, Leading from the Second Chair. So that's a helpful resource if you're just looking for a book. But the truth is this: every organization, every human grouping has all kinds of issues. I think one of the threats to the millennial generation, to Gen Z, is just be obsessed with grass is greener. Like, there has to be a different thing. So even some of the dilution of our faith right now is like, oh, it can't be this, right? Like, it has to be better. And so for me, part of the reason that I've stayed, when people are like, man, why don't you just go do something a little more fun, or like what feels easier? Because it would be easier in some ways to not do this. I just go like, all right, so either we all leave and we try to do our own thing, which seems self-serving to me, or we submit to what God's calling us to do, and he happens to introduce us to certain people and networks for a time. It's not like you have to stay in one church or one denomination, but not losing heart and staying there to know. And what I tell young leaders is, look, this leadership team right now, some of them are still, they look older and they might feel older, but the edginess is there. Like, the future thinking is there. We'll sit around tables this week to wrestle through issues that have a 20, 30, 40 year impact that are very relevant. Like, we are not pretending, that something different is happening. So staying the course and then understanding how do you influence with what you have. It's funny that you bring up the maverick word, because I'm releasing a book finally next year, hopefully, if I can get it done, with one of my mentors that we've been on this journey for like 20, 25 years together. And one of the chapters is, are you maverick enough to do this? And part of the reason that we talk about that is, and I would say this is true about the Alliance. A lot of us are tempted to do things creatively. In other words, you take something and make it a little bit cooler or a little bit better, or you dress a little bit differently. Imagination takes that maverick sort of spirit to go, what if? And then you just ask different questions.
Yeah.
What if money wasn't an object? What if we didn't have to do this thing structurally? What if, and I believe that some of those questions are being asked. It takes incredible patience in a 130-year-old organization to get there. But man, I feel like there's space being created right now for some of this. And I would not stay if I didn't think that. I mean, there's other things you can do in life, so that might even make more money and other things. But like, if you're called to something and you believe there's space and hope, then you stay the task. And part of that, I'm preaching now, but part of this, I think. So I had a guy call me this week, early 30s in ministry, starting in ministry. He called me this week and he's doing some class, and he said, okay, I'm starting in ministry and I have to ask like 3 people this question. What are the 3 things you would say to somebody starting in ministry? So I'm like, the third thing I said surprised me, so I'm glad I get to reuse it because I think it was maybe from God, and it's at least true for me. I think ministry and just doing this journey is equal parts suffering and joy. And we're all about joy and maximizing and finding the thing that's fulfilling. The suffering piece is just a part of it. And some of that suffering is sticking around and wading through change. Some of that suffering is not getting your own way. Some of that suffering is like a preference thing that you have to let go of. And there are times when I think as purists, like millennials, Gen Z, it's like, I won't be myself then. And that's the worst possible thing. I just see Jesus saying like, pick up your cross and die, then you'll find out who you are. Yeah. And so part of the gospel is an invitation for us to just die to ourselves and realize this is about something bigger. And then if you can find people that are aligned enough, then you stay the course and let him and trust him. Yeah. So that's part of what, I mean, that might be a little heavy handed, but that's part
good.
of it for me.
That's good. That's good. So in wrapping up, what do you think are 1, maybe 2 of the biggest threats that you see, whether it's to the Alliance or just, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, just in American Christendom in general, but what do you think are some of the biggest threats that we have to, keep our eyes on? Yeah. And that if we don't first naming them is the first step in being able to defeat them, but how do we, what are those threats? So
for me, the big word is syncretism, but what syncretism means is like we want our faith and something else, and we just like get co-opted. So you see this on the political spectrum right now on every side. Like, it's funny, it's not just one side. It feels like people are like, well, to really be a Christian, now there are important things that we need to vote on, but it seems to me like during COVID, it was evident that some people were much more concerned about other things than Jesus, or than people coming to faith, or than discipleship. Like it seemed like people were more up in arms about masks or no masks than they were like, my neighbor doesn't know Jesus, or like, is my heart right with God? And so I think being co-opted in a very strong, accessible culture, like because we're all online, we know about everything now. We know everything available to us religiously, sexually, consumering. I mean, Rachel and I a couple of months ago started talking to each other about like getting back in shape, and Instagram was just full of like weight loss tips, right? And it's just right. And Jesus is inviting us into a little bit more pure and basic understanding of what it means to follow him and do it with each other. And so our churches are at risk of getting co-opted right now. I mean, I have pastor friends who are telling me people are leaving their churches over just the craziest stuff. So that's a huge threat. And it's it's like, okay, we'll switch political, regimes. It doesn't fix the core problem. I think the other thing is one threat, and I've touched on this a little bit, but the Supreme Court, so I don't want to get too technical here, but the Supreme Court has been really strong about religious liberty. They're just showing that. They're also really strong on sexual liberty. So the idea that I can just do anything I want to do whenever, with whomever, and I can be anybody I want to be is a threat to the church, because we submit ourselves to Christ and to one another. To submit yourself to somebody else means to let go of what it means for me to identify as whatever. And so that makes me a little nervous for the future missionary sending group, unless we do a really good discipleship, because it's going to require so much sacrifice, like we've talked, and so much surrender and so much death to self. And in a culture that's increasingly like, I can just choose to be whatever I want to be, there is some beauty in like identifying the diversity in human beings. But that radical like liberty that's not Christian liberty is a threat.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, I can get as rich as I want. All those kind of things that feel anti-Christian historically, but right now we're going to be in a battle with them.
Yeah.
Where the culture is really tough. And these are very complex issues. And I know you guys talk about a lot of this stuff. So it's not like, but I think to keep our eye on the ball with some of this is going to be important, or else we're not going to have international workers.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, that sounds strong, but it's true. I mean, to sacrifice for someone else. So.
Yeah. Well, and even in a post-Christian environment that we're in, and you talk about the sexual liberty and things like that, I think as a church, we have to figure out, man, if we do believe that Jesus, that God has established sexuality in a certain way,
right?
And man, what happens if somebody decides to follow Jesus and they're like, the way I've been identifying, or the changes I've made physically no longer represent who I am. Like at that point, still what the church has a lot of decisions to make.
There's a million of these scenarios.
How do we respond to people in those kinds of situations? As more and more people are growing up in same-sex families, like how do we respond to all of those types of things? And so it's just more complicated than I think than most people.
It's very complicated.
Want to, and nuanced. The discussion has to be much more nuanced.
But
than
the
we're ready
nuance
for.
is where the missionary stuff happens. That's really, every international worker is forced into deep nuance all the time. We just haven't had to nuance in those ways. We probably should have been nuancing a little bit more, but you're right. That's going to be a challenge for us. But again, in all those things, there's opportunity. Like we could tell story after story of how God works in people's lives, and he's so gracious, and we're all messed up. Yeah. We're all fractured sexually. We're all fractured in our identities. Yeah. Like it's not like anybody's figured this out, but it's going to be a challenge.
That's good. Well, thanks again for your time, just being here and chatting with us. And hopefully for people that are like, what is CCC all about? What's part of our denomination? We covered a lot of stuff. And so I'm just grateful for your willingness to be here and talk about just your position, where our denomination's headed, and all of those things. And so for those of you who listen weekly, we are just grateful again that you've listened to us. Thanks again for listening. If you want to send us any comments, questions, concerns, you wish Eric was here, just send those to online at CCC. I just made that up. Send it to podcast at cccomaha.org. This is why Eric usually does that. Until next time, we'll see you then.